So funny story, I'm going to explain it because you can't actually hear it. It's not like a microphone. It's for the recording. So if you're like, what is she doing? She thinks she's using a microphone. And yeah, no, I know I'm not using a microphone, I promise. How's everyone doing? To be a little more awake, I feel like the first panel, we were still kind of catching our bearings this morning. Ready to go? Everyone's here for solo show work, yeah? Perfect. Okay, you're in the right room. Yay. Okay, well, in case anyone missed the first portion of the day, I'm Lois. My pronouns are she, her. I am the co-executive director at Hollywood Fringe. A visual description, I am a white woman with mid-length dark brown hair, currently wearing a striped shirt and green vest. We do that for anyone in the room or on the recording who is visually impaired so that they can be a part of the day. Quick land acknowledgement. The Hollywood Fringe acknowledges we are on the unceded lands of the Tongva, Quiche, Gabrielinos, and Gabrielinos. Our statement serves as a practice as we commit to furthering our connection to Indigenous communities past, present, and emerging. So this panel is going to be all about solo work at Fringe. And we're going to dive into the exceptional knowledge and experience of these two brilliant panelists. Y'all, I'm so excited. I'm so excited that you both are here and that you agreed to do this panel because you have so much to share. So we're going to pick their brains and really dive into the creative process, but also what the process is like as a producer doing a solo show, because there's so much more to it than just writing the solo show. So we're going to really go through the entirety of the process. So we'll chat for about an hour and then we'll open it up to questions. So please, I know you're going to have questions. Try to hold on to them, and we will have at least 25 minutes at the end. Okay, panelists, friends.
Hello.
Will you please introduce yourself, name, pronouns, and talk about your experience at Fringe, about the show you brought to Fringe, and just your background as an artist?
We'll start.
Okay.
Yeah, keep it casual, like just go back and forth, and we can interrupt each other. It'll be great.
I can start. Hello, everyone. My name is Myriam, and I am a Lebanese artist. My pronouns are she, her. Visual description, I'm wearing a brown suit, a striped brown suit with a black shirt with Arabic and English writing, and then a blue scarf or a kufiye. And then talk about my experience with Fringe, right? That's why we're here. So I did a show called Handala for the Fringe Festival, obviously a solo show. It's a show about Palestine. I wrote it. I had originally done like a very short version of it when I was taking a solo class. And with everything going on, like with October of last year, I was like, this is the time to take it to the bigger audience, the public, and raise awareness and so on and so forth. So I honestly like how I decided to do it in the Fringe Festival is when I had a few friends who did that in my solo class. They did that the year before me, so I was like, that's a great idea. That's a great way to do it. I received an email about the BIPOC and disabled grant, so scholarship. So I applied, got it, and I was like, okay, that's great. Now I need to write a script. Now I'm in.
You aren't alone. It happens a lot.
So I was like, okay, I have this idea, but then also the goal had changed because a lot had happened since then with like Palestine and the whole world. So I shifted the goals. I wanted to focus on the humanization of Palestinians and really inviting people to look at them as human beings instead of like either victims or terrorists. That's how they're portrayed in the media, which is awful. And so I decided to go ahead and go interview a few Palestinians because, I'm Lebanese. Also, it's very, very similar experiences, but also different. We were one same country, crashed history course, but the West divided us. Woo! Anyway, so I was like, yeah, I want to include the Palestinian voices. So I interviewed a few Palestinians, collected a large number of stories, and I selected a few that would fit into one like timeline. I connected characters to each other, and I also had a IDF soldier, an IDF soldier in the and IDF is the Israeli army. In the show, I hadn't interviewed one specifically, but I had watched testimonies and documentaries about their experiences, and just realizing what they are doing and coming out of the brainwashing and the realization of all the indoctrination and so on. So put that into one solo show, gathered up a team of people to help me out. And I would say that's like super important to do. It can be very overwhelming to do it just by yourself, especially if it's a solo show and you're like all alone. So it's very important to have a team with you that's dedicated to do the work, interested in the work and so on. And brought it into the festival.
Did you win any awards?
I did. I did win I did win the Best Solo Show Award. That was amazing. Thank you. It was great, and to me, like honestly, also we oversold the whole run. Not sold out. We oversold the whole run.
The amount of support emails we got.
Oh yeah. Like, can I switch this one around? Anyway,
a good problem to have.
Yeah, a very good problem to have. But the most important part for me in winning the award is just the representation that the Hollywood Fringe offers. It's very important to artists like me, Arab artists, Muslim artists, marginalized communities, or not marginalized, or minorities, to really have a space to speak out and share voices. And especially in the topic of Palestine, anyone in Hollywood, or you've seen a lot of people who have been fired because they dared to speak up and share a story, share their grief, or share their compassion towards Palestinian people. Like people like Susan Sarandon lost her agent. Like, can you imagine that? Like someone as big as Susan Sarandon losing her agent because she dared speak up. So that was super important to me, that the Hollywood Fringe Festival was a festival that will really give you the platform to share whatever you want to share without being judged, without being forced to do something you're not comfortable with. So that was a very important part for me, honestly. And thank you also, and Ellen, for doing such an amazing job with that. And
I think open access creates space for beauty in the world to come out. And I think it's important to us. And I'm so glad that the artists who show up bring that, because then we're able to really showcase Los Angeles, the world, because that's what art does, right? It builds humanity. It tells stories that maybe we're not familiar with. We learn, we grow. And so I'm just so honored that artists bring that work to our stages, so that our city is more uplifted and we're able to learn and grow from each other. You actually brought up, I'm gonna steer off for just a quick minute and then we'll get to you, John, I promise. But you brought up just about open access and creating that space. And so I think it's a good chance to just bring up to those that are new. So Hollywood Fringe is open access. There are limits to that, and that helps allow for a safe space so that work can, really be vulnerable, and you as an artist can be vulnerable in our space. So we have a code of conduct and a community ethos that requires, people to act as if they are in a professional space, because you are, and it does get forgotten sometimes, because we are, we say welcome to the family and we mean it. But even a family has to have boundaries, right? So with work, you can absolutely bring anything to Fringe as long as it is not hate speech toward a protected group. So know that. And it's not something that we have a problem with really ever. But know as you're creating your work, and if you have questions about that, the Hollywood Fringe team is here to help support that. If you're like, ooh, this is, maybe satire, but I want to make sure that, we're not going to get into any trouble later. We're always here to help with that. We have an access advisory board that is also a really great advisory for us to make sure that, maybe it's not a topic I am super familiar on. We have people who are able to help us along that way. So know that when it comes to the work, the open access has limits, but it really does provide a space for you to be fully vulnerable and fully bring the artistic brilliance that you have inside of you to the stage. Okay, thank you. John, please, I'll give you the list again because it's been, 10 minutes. So if you could give us your name, pronouns, visual description, and tell us about your Fringe experience, your show, and your background as an actor.
Sure. Hi, my name is John Gentry. Pronouns are he and him. I am a Black male dressed in all military green from head to toe. I'm wearing a baseball cap, a jacket, and green pants. My experience with the Fringe, I started as a performer back in 2016. A friend asked me to be part of their 10-minute play, essentially. And I just did the show and wasn't even aware about like the vastness of the world that was happening around me. But because I'd known of the Hollywood Fringe, I knew that eventually I wanted to return and probably do work of my own. So it was always sort of like in the back of my head for the past 8 years or so. Last year, I applied for in 2023, I applied for the diversity scholarship. And it was the first time I put ideas on paper for the show that was kind of like bubbling in my mind. But again, like it was very nebulous. And so I was grateful just to have like, again, something to like dump my ideas into as it was still forming. So
the application was like your first step to creation.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. Again, I need containers. I need deadlines. Like that will help me get to where I need to be.
Yeah.
I wasn't awarded the scholarship last year. And so I was kind of like very bummed about that. And I was like, well, maybe it's not meant to be. So I just sort of put it to the side. But obviously like that seed had been planted. And then as 2024 rolled around, I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna apply again. I really believed in sort of like the open access element to it. And I told myself at the end of 2023, I was like, whether I receive a scholarship or not, I'm going to make this show happen. I'll figure it out because it needs to be told. It was just really something in me was like, this is the time. I think it was a combination of the post-pandemic sort of era and the entertainment strikes where just like so much of the town had shut down because I am primarily an actor. And I was like, it's time to take creative control of my career and share my stories. And so I was like, all right, we're going to do it again. So I reapplied for the scholarship at the beginning of 2024. And my ideas were a little more coherent, still very just like, what? Because I hadn't actually written a script. I had written down some stories that I knew I wanted to share, but there was no script. And I was awarded the honorable mention for the diversity scholarship.
Yeah, it's so hard. The applications are so
yes,
amazing.
It's very thorough, which is great though, because it really helped me sort of think about not only like what story am I trying to tell, but like how am I going to tell it? Yeah. Who am I going to tell it with? Because you ask about collaborators. And so the application itself was like really important for me to sort of break down different processes so that I would have like a way in once I actually started. And what was great about receiving the honorable mention was, I think Ellen mentioned like other funders may reach out to you. And there was a producer, Theater Asylum, Matt Quinn and Berta Rodriguez. They reached out and they were like, hey, we have a scholarship we would like you to apply for as well. And I was like, okay, well, I've already done one and I got some of my ideas on paper, so I might as well. And yeah, they awarded me their scholarship. So I was like, okay, now I got a deadline. So it's time to write. So I got like a lot more serious in terms of like, where do I, like, what is this? I knew what the story was, but like, how do I want to tell it? And I had friends who are writers. I had never written anything before. This is my first time writing. And my friends were like, you got to outline, like create an outline so you can just map it out from start to finish. So I did that. And even at first it was like story. So I felt like I was writing a series of short stories.
Maybe that's next.
Yes. I knew as soon as I had the idea, I knew who I wanted to work with, who I wanted to direct the piece. And gratefully, she was available. I just worked with a lot of past collaborators because my background is primarily as a theater practitioner. And I've been doing theater for like 15 plus years. A lot of my classmates from grad school were people who I sort of brought on board because I just trusted them implicitly to work with me. And I was like, I know I can be very vulnerable with you because you've seen me through so much. So that collaboration was like really wonderful so that I didn't feel like I was in a silo as I was sort of writing and getting it all out on paper. So I wrote from about January to literally May. In May, we started rehearsing and kind of met twice a week to just run through the show. And then June arrived and I was like, oh, it's time to perform.
Ding, ding, ding.
And like that very first performance was the most nerve-wracking experience I've ever had in my life. I have never been more nervous than sharing my like story in front of people by myself. Like I'm used to ensemble work as an actor. Like I'm always got people to fall back on. And I was like, oh wait, there's no safety net. I just have to power through.
This is the brave room, y'all. You're like the ones that are getting, I couldn't do it. So I have all of the respect for those that can get up on stage and just be by themselves like that.
Yeah. I mean, there were 3 moments I wanted to quit during my first performance. And I was like, John, like, the audience is here.
You can't leave the stage.
We can't. Like, we got to get through it one way or another. So just keep on going. And I got through it. And it was great. Like I remember walking out of the theater after that first performance and there was just like so much love, like on the sidewalk. I was in the Stephanie Fury Studio Theater. So it's like you walk out and you're just like right there on Melrose Avenue and just like all my friends and like loved ones are just like showering me with love. And I was just like, oh, okay. I think it was okay. And then, from there, the run was great. Like, I think word of mouth just really started to kind of like blow up. And like, again, I blasted every single friend I could to like come see the show. I actually ended up, originally I was only going to do 3 shows. Those sold out before the Fringe even started, I think.
Yeah, I remember.
So I added a performance and then got awarded we did like 3 encore performances. Once the festival was over. It was crazy. It was such a whirlwind. It just kind of like flew by. But it was really great to not only continue to do the work, but also go see and support others' work because that community really did sort of like you just felt the community growing every time you attended any event, whether that was office hours or where we went to Fringe Central. And it was just kind of like, oh, okay, like we're all in this together and let's do it. Like people are like the energy and the support is like next level. Like it's wonderful.
Yeah, I love that. Like just like the Fringe experience can certainly empty your cup in a lot of ways, but it will refill when you show up, right? It's gonna be constantly like drink it up, fill it up, drink it up, fill it up. Like it really will.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the award ceremony, again, I was nominated for I think 3 awards and was kind of like, okay, like whatever, like I'm not gonna win, but I won like the Best of Asylum, which was the producing partners that I worked with, and the Soaring Solo Social Impact Award, which is hosted by Soaring Solo Studios, who is also very integral to just helping me get ideas. Like, please look up Soaring Solo Studios. They have a ton of like free content on YouTube. Jessica Lynn Johnson is like such a wonderful resource. But she has like free writing classes online where you can just sign up, show up and just write for half an hour. And a lot of that material didn't even make it into the show, but just the process of writing was so valuable to help me kind of move things forward. So yeah, after Fringe, I had actually, like literally the week before Fringe, I had applied for another festival up in San Francisco through Playground, which is a new works incubator. It's primarily based out of San Francisco, but they have branches in LA, Chicago, and New York. And they accepted it. Again, this was before Fringe, so I was like, I don't even have a show yet, but
Sure.
people want to do it. So, but it was nice because I got to then travel the show to San Francisco. I wanted to see, like, can the show travel? Like, can it tour? What does it look like if it's in a different space? And that went really well. And so I did 5 performances up there. And then that was like June, July, August, September. And then September came and I was like, okay, it's time for a break. Because I ended up doing 7 performances with the Fringe and Encore series, and then 5 up in San Francisco. Ooh. Yeah. And so I was like, all right, take a breath. It was a whirlwind, but it was fun. It was so much fun.
I love it. And y'all, these two, like, soak it up. I heard so much about both of your works during the Fringe. Like, you were definitely Fringe favorites. But you showed up, right? Like, we're going to say it over and again, but you showed up for yourselves, and that you really invested in the work. You went to the workshops, you met with the community, and then you invested in other people. And I think you saw, so that word of mouth really did impact your sales because you showed up for others. So thank you for being such examples of just how to support community and be a part of the process. You started talking on it, John. So I want to dive more into, like, the creative process. Like, so Myriam, I'm going to take it to you first. When did you start writing your Fringe show? And you talked a little bit about starting it before Fringe. But what was that timeline from, like, inception of the idea to opening night?
So when I was writing it for the Fringe, I already had like a 12-minute a 12-minute script solo show. That
got a little longer after that.
Yeah, it did. I already had it, and I was like, okay, but then, as I said before, the goal changed, and I just had to change the whole thing. I still used a little bit of ideas that I had already. I started writing it right when I received the email that I got the scholarship. So I'm like, okay, I gotta do it. It was also January is when I started writing it. And I would say it was up until also like May. I was writing because it was like, it's also like you start getting into the rehearsal room and things change and you're like, oh, this works better, that works better. So it's like a work in progress. It's also like, I also took it to the Philly French Festival and the Cannonball Festival and then United Solo Festival in New York. So those shows had changed a lot since the first time I put it on at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. I had, like, 5 days before my first Philly show, I had interviewed an ex-Israeli soldier, and I changed the whole monologue based on his experience.
Whoa.
Yeah. It was like all different. And then I changed the order of some stuff, and I had another a movement director that came in for the New York show, and we reblocked everything. So it was like always a work in progress. And I think that's like the beauty of the Fringe and writing a show for the Fringe. It's like a starting point for you to grow and keep working on your show and your work. And yeah,
I love, absolutely. And I think because I like, again, Fringe can be whatever you want it to be, but don't be afraid to use Fringe as a testing ground, as a playground. So, you're not going to perform every day like an Edinburgh Fringe model. You're going to have breaks usually in between your shows. And we see it all the time. I've seen a show more than once during a run, and it changed drastically from opening to closing. And so as long as you stay within the time frame in which you've agreed to with your venue, that's going to be key. And we're going to really nail that down later, but it has to stay at around the same runtime or be less than. But outside of that, let this be a place for you to take risk, build that self-efficacy as an artist, because you're not going to find a kinder audience because they understand that Fringe, they're getting to see something likely for the first time.
Mhm.
And the audience really does love being a part of the journey of the art. So use it for that and don't be afraid to, try new things, make mistakes, and then try it a different way the next day. John, did you want to go into more detail? Because I know you started, but what were some of the more specific steps in your writing process?
Absolutely. Also, I realized I didn't even talk about my show.
You didn't.
So let's do that.
I like the teaser though. You really built up the anticipation.
So my show is titled Black Bastard, and it was about me growing up in the South without my biological father and always wanting to meet him. And then when I finally met him when I was 15, I wished we had never met. So it was like a very, very vulnerable story that I had sort of just kind of held inside for years. But I knew I was like, I want to tell this story one day. Last September, October, I started seeing a therapist because I was just like, I need to go to therapy. The world is insane. And I didn't even realize it at the time, but a lot of our conversations were around my upbringing and family. And she was helping me sort of process questions that I had, just parts of me that I had locked away. And then I went home for Thanksgiving back to Houston and had very long overdue conversations with my mom about my childhood and upbringing, just kind of filling in gaps where I think I had created stories in my mind. And after those conversations with my mom, I was like, okay, it's time to write. So during the Christmas holidays, I locked myself in a room for 2 days and I just kind of wrote. And I was like, I want to tell this story. I want to tell that story. And I was just writing. It was just a dump. And it was very stream of consciousness, but it was just whatever I remembered from those days, I just kind of got it on the page. I worked primarily from I work with different acting techniques. And so I teach Michael Chekhov acting technique. And so I worked with a lot of imagery. There were enduring images that I just remember from my childhood. So there's a snow cone that's a part of my story from when I was 6 years old. And that was the first image. And that was the first story that was pressing in my mind because it was the last time I remember seeing my dad. I was 6 and my mom took me to get snow cones. So I let that image, I built from there. And then in terms of character work, there's about 15 different characters in my show. And once we started getting into the rehearsal room, I gave each character a very specific gesture, a physical gesture so that they were distinct. And from the physicalization of each character, different voices came out. And so I really practiced just making sure everyone was different and just finding inspiration from wherever. I remember I was on a hike once and I saw a black beetle on the ground, and I have this really nasty character in my play, and I was like, that's him. And so I started moving the beetle and brought that into the rehearsal room. I just absorb inspiration from wherever I can. But for me, the writing was after I dumped all the stories on the page, I just started to keep a running journal on a Google Doc, and any time I had an idea, I'd be driving or just walking or at the gym, and I would open up that Google Doc, put a date, and then start bullet pointing whatever ideas I had so that I wouldn't forget anything. There's also some musical components to the show, so I would use my voice memos just to kind of if there was a tune in my head, I would just let's get this down because I probably won't remember it later. And that just kind of turned into an evolving journal of the show and different ideas where I was I don't know if this is going to work, but I really sort of led from a space of yes and. I notoriously self-edit, I'm sure a lot of us do. I'm always in my head, and I was like, John, just allow the creative impulses to flow. Especially because at the first read through with my director, we were on Zoom, and the piece was maybe like 60% of the way done. So I read what I had, and she was like, "This is a good story," but she was like, "It's not really theatrical."
Mm-hmm.
She was like, "How are we going to like make it more of a theater experience?" And then I read it to my mom, and she was like, "Great story. How are you going to keep us entertained?" I was like,
Mom,
dang. Note taken. And that's when I really went in there, and I was like, you know what? The theater is really a space of magic. You can do anything you want if you can imagine it.
Yes.
And so that's when I started to add all of these theatrical elements of like audience interaction, or like I added in some magical realism. And so like I was playing like objects all of a sudden, and I just really expanded my own vision of like what was possible in the telling of the story. And that made it more fun for me. Like I remember I would be writing something and I was like, what if the car was a character? That's crazy. Let's do it. And then the car became a character.
Yes, and
because anytime I was stuck, I was just like, let's like get up, shake the body around, jog some new ideas, and like let's run with that. Because it doesn't need to be this one monotone sort of thing, I think, from start to finish.
Yeah. Oh, God, I love that. And I'm going to follow up with you before we jump because you hit on something I'd love. That was my next question. How did you navigate the vulnerability involved in bringing a story that is so personal to the stage? Sorry, big question, I know.
That's a really good question. Again, I think that's where a lot of the fear came from.
Yeah.
Like once I had actually finished the script, I asked my director Chanel. I was like, "Can we do a reading over Zoom?" And it was like a lot more theatrical this time. But I remember I read it, and I hadn't even really like told her the ending yet. She kind of knew what happened, but again, I hadn't like actually said the words. And I remember that first read through, like I got to the end, and like we both just kind of like broke down in that moment, because I was sharing like my truth with her for the first time. But what was really beautiful is that like it ends on a really triumphant moment where it gets like really tragic, and then I like reclaim sort of like my own power at the end. And I think that was necessary so that we didn't like, I don't know, traffic in the trauma.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I felt like the vulnerability was necessary. Brene Brown says vulnerability is the only bridge to connection. And so it was, I just knew it was important to be not only vulnerable in a way of like, oh, let me tell you this like really sad thing that happened to me, but also vulnerable and like, let me be an ass in front of people and just like go crazy and just like really have fun. I think vulnerability can show up in so many ways. What is your sense of humor? Like, let me see that. What do you find funny? Or like, what do you think nobody really wants? Like, or what are you afraid to talk about that you think like, there's no way I could tell this to somebody? Let's share that. Because those are the moments where people really lean in and they're like, oh, wow. Like if you're being vulnerable by yourself on stage, it's like, what am I capable of doing and sharing? And I honestly feel like that contributed to this. I've talked to a lot of people after the show and they were like, it feels very universal. Like a lot of people came up to me after the show and they were like, wait, I'm technically a bastard too. Like I was born out of wedlock and I didn't know my father, or I didn't know my mom, or I know my siblings are bastards. And there was like this collectivity or collectiveness to the story that for me is so important because I was speaking on a panel on Thursday and I was like, I want my work to be timely, but I also want it to be timeless. And I want there to be an enduring quality to the work. And so I think you got to go there. Like the scary parts are the parts that like you must reveal, because that's when people are really going to respond, and just it's an act of courage.
Yeah.
And I think it's important.
Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
thank you for being vulnerable in this moment, because I do think I'm over here a little teary-eyed just because I truly am in awe the strength and the weight that an artist carries. Because exactly what you're talking about and what both of you did in your shows. You held weight so that the audience could connect, so that the audience could have an experience that they needed to have. And so, like, recognizing the weight that this room will carry as artists, it's such a beautiful thing. And to, lean on each other throughout that process, because what you're doing is changing the world. And it really is beautiful to just witness and uplift in any way the Fringe can. You're right. No, I am such a sap. I can't help it. Okay. So switching gears a little bit. I mean, your show was definitely a mixture of both research and then personal experience. Can you talk about that and switching gears, and what was research like? What was that process in the creation of your show?
Of course. So, as you said, my show was not all based on my personal experience, which actually a lot of people, that's my first solo show, and a lot of people like came up to me and was like it's very interesting. People usually start with their personal story. It's interesting that you're starting with like a story that's not exactly yours. But I also think it's almost the same thing, because, it's again, looking at these people's stories and really seeing yourself in these stories and how you can relate to all these stories. And again, like after my shows, people came up to me and they were like, you really helped us see those people as human beings, because those stories that you shared are stories that we could relate to. We could really feel. They love, they laugh, they live, they grieve, they live human emotions, just like human experiences and emotions, just like we do. And that was, I think, a very important part for me, is just to really make it personal, not just focus on the worldliness of it. When I was with the research and so on, it was a lot of it also was, when I was doing interviews with the people that ended up being my characters in the story, in the show, I was asking stories like, give me a life story for you that represents Palestine, or a story that you really remember as a from your childhood that really stuck with you, the best day of your life, the worst day of your life. And it went on to like a lot of deep stories that connected to that bigger topic of Palestine, of social justice, of anti-colonialism, and so on and so forth. Obviously, like I grew up in Lebanon, and I experienced a lot of things that not on the same level, of course, as Palestinians do, but very similar experiences. I lived a war in Lebanon. The south of Lebanon was occupied for a long time by Israel, and I was actually born around that time, and it was occupied till 2000. And my family's from the south, so a lot of time I only went to where my family is from when I was an older child. Like I had never seen that place before, where my parents grew up and my grandparents grew up, and all my heritage came from. And I remember going into the building where my parents, or my mom, had a lot of memories there, and it was just dusty and abandoned, and she started crying, and I was like, wow, like all these stories that relate to each other. And also now what's happening in Lebanon as well is just like also very, very similar. And it gets to a point where, I want to link those personal stories to universal stories, to remind people that this could happen to literally any one of us. Because it happened to someone, it can definitely happen to you. If you don't care about the people, then just care about yourself at least, and, fight for humanity, because, the world is in flames and it's going downhill. Hopefully it's just the fall of a whole system that's horrible, and a start of something new and beautiful. And that's also an important thing in my show, is, showing the horrors, but also remembering together that we, have a choice. We can make things better, and things are in our hands at the end of the day.
There was so much joy in your show too. And I thought that was such a beautiful, because you're right, it brings the humanity to the front. 100%. And actually diving in, this wasn't on my list, but can you talk about some of the events you had after the show?
Yeah.
That I think that was such a fun addition to your Fringe experience.
Yeah. So actually we had little things before the show and after the show. We tried at every single show at the Hollywood Fringe to have some vendors from the Swana, which is it's a better way to say Middle East. Swana is South, West Asia and North Africa. Middle East is very West centered. So we try to use the Swana abbreviation. So a lot of Swana vendors to come and sell their things, give them a platform to, sell shirts and merchandise and so on. And just part of the percentage, that was the deal we made with them, part of the percentage. Oh, that's something I also forgot to mention, that all the proceeds from my show were being donated to a family in Gaza that was trying to evacuate their mother who had cancer, so that she could get life-saving treatment, which she hadn't been able to get for more than a year now. And then the kids, the family were the siblings, who are all medical volunteers and doctors, wanted to stay in Gaza so that they can help their community and stay behind. So they just wanted to send their mother and stay to support their people. So just a percentage of the proceeds that the vendors did would also go to that family. That was like before the show, and then after the show, we did a small Debke workshop. Debke is the Palestinian Lebanese traditional dance, and it's when you watch it, and you participated in it, it's very similar to a lot of indigenous dances, and that's what it is. It's the stomping and the connection to the earth, to the roots, and it's such a joyful and celebratory dance. It's done in weddings. That's what it's mostly performed at. So we taught the culture of that dance to everyone who wanted to participate after that, and it was amazing. It was just building of the community that really was beautiful to me, and that was a big part of my show, I think.
Yeah, I love that. And theater, I mean, there's no limits.
Yeah.
Whatever, like it kind of goes back to your goals, right? What are your goals in producing this piece? And then, stretch outside of the box. Yes. And, the ideas that come into your head. And if they're fitting within those goals, then they're right. Follow your gut. Your artistic gut is what needs to be followed throughout the process. Let's switch gears over to editing, because that is an important and difficult part of the process, right? As you marry each and every word on the page.
Yes.
So, John, can you talk about the editing process? And I guess specifically with solo work, you are often writing this solo. So talk about anyone you brought in and how those conversations went. If, there were some things you didn't want to cut and so forth.
Let's see. I led again with this mantra of like, nothing is precious. So if my director was like, this is not working, I was like, it's chopped. It's gone. Okay. Like, you ain't feeling it. I'm not feeling it. So, also,
I need this mentality.
Well, again, it was like, we're working toward a deadline. Like, I knew by June 6th, it was the first day of Fringe, I had a date, and I was like, I got to get up there and it's got to be under 60 minutes
Yeah.
because they were like, we will turn the lights off on you and we got to keep it moving because there's another show coming in behind you.
No,
So-
you don't have to keep the show. You can have whatever length of a show you want at Fringe. Although ideally, like the shows that are like 60 minutes and under tend to be easier to sell. But you cannot, whatever you book with your venue must be stuck to, just so we don't end up with a whole bunch of like, oh my God, my show's 2 hours.
That's also why I was like super nervous during the first performance because I was like, am I going to go over an hour? Am I going to go over an hour? 'Cause I was like right there. I was like, they're going to cut the lights on me. Oh my God. So yeah, my original, the first like full draft that I had was twice as long as the final draft that was performed. And again, there were so many things where I was like, oh, I don't want to take this out. But it was like, John, it's not working. So, and also for me, like the month of May when I started rehearsing was probably the biggest editing process because once I was on my feet and I was kind of like, oh yeah, this section is like too wordy, it's too talky. I had to just personally, I had to like really trim down any moments where it felt like I was just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can really communicate, like you can set the scene, you can like really bring people into the world really quickly. And once they get like the atmospheric component and they know where we are, like you don't really have to belabor in that. And so it's like, let's get to the action, right? And I think technically my show is like a series of like 10 episodes or 10 scenes. And so I was like, what is the event of each scene? Like, what are we trying to reveal in each one? Let's get there. And how are we going to reveal it? Is it's through, again, this musical moment, or it's through these two characters having a dialogue with one another, or it's through this dance that I randomly choreographed in the middle of the show.
The show has it all, folks.
Oh yeah, it has a lot. Like I was like, y'all want theatrical? Here we go. But yeah, I was just like, if it's got to go, it's got to go. And we timed each rehearsal and it kept being like, it's 90 minutes, it's 80 minutes, it's 75. We need to get it under an hour. So I just, and it was like one thing that I think a lot of people also responded to. They were like, the show is really lean. It's like, there is no fat. And I feel it too, because when I'm up there, it's like, it's a marathon. Like it takes a lot of stamina to be on stage by yourself for an hour or shorter. Like, again, some shows are 35 minutes and that's great too. But it just, you want to make sure that like you keep it moving. There's pacing. I think that was important for us, is making sure we don't feel like we're leaning back. I want people sitting forward and tuning in to like what's happening. Oh, what else was I going to say? Oh, also the show's not done. We were kind of mentioning this earlier. Like, I feel like I'm still workshopping this show. Eventually I do want like a 75-minute version of my show. And so there are a couple of scenes that I have been workshopping with some other Fringe friends that I've made.
That you made here?
Yes. So I'm like workshopping additional scenes. Because again, like I want the work to respond to the moment. And I think there are certain elements that I knew I wanted, but I was like, I don't think I can do it for this first go. So it's still a work in progress. Yeah.
I love
feel
that.
like I'll keep editing.
Yeah. We see that all the time. And so know if you're like, oh man, I have 2 hours of brilliance, like locked and loaded, that's okay. Maybe you have a shorter version at Fringe, or maybe you're ready to do the full thing. And that's, again, totally fine too. But we do see it pretty often where someone will take an hour version of something that they intend to make longer, or add sets to, or, add more cast members to, but bring maybe a more scaled down version to Fringe. That's something we see quite often. All right. What about you, Myriam?
Yeah, I experienced a lot of things that are very similar to what John shared. And again, like that's one big thing is just kill your darlings. That's very important. Originally, in my show, there's a lot of poems that had been written by Palestinians that I also use, and I had this very big poem about Jerusalem and visiting Jerusalem as a Palestinian visiting Jerusalem in the first time and noticing how, he's not part of it, but this is his city also, but it's so different and so on. And I loved that poem so much. And I had the whole poem in there. And I was like, it was long. And when we did the first reading with my directors, we were like, okay, this feels too long. So we got to cut. We started cutting, and I'm debating, and it's like, no, but I love this verse so much. It's so good. It's so poetic. I love it. I don't want to remove it. We ended up cutting it. Yeah. I fought for it, but now I'm like, I'm happy with it. That also, it's a work in progress. And after the first show, I was like, after the few first shows, I would, or after the first or second show, I would basically, without even telling my directors or anything, I'd be removing lines that I'm like, those are not needed really. And the next show, I'm just like doing it without those lines. Of course, if it's a cue line, I have to say it because tech.
Write that down,
yeah. Because tech. But if it's like in between, I'll remove it without really telling anyone.
You got bolder as you went.
Yeah. And then for the shows in Philly and New York, there were huge parts that we completely cut out that I was like, when I was performing it in the Hollywood Fringe Festival, and I'm like, I'm getting to that point and I'm dreading, I don't want to do this part. And then I'm realizing, but then I don't need it. Like, it's not, just remove it. And this moment is not really working. The joke is not landing or whatever. Just get rid of it. So yeah, it's again, it's a work in progress. It's always going to be a work in progress. And the first version is probably not going to be the last version of it. So, whatever feels right to you in that moment, go for it, and be ready to kill your darlings.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I'm just so curious, because you had a mixture of words that were yours and words that were not yours. Did you find cutting one or the other easier? Like, was it harder to cut other people's words in your script? Or maybe there's not a big difference.
I think there wasn't as much of a difference in between those two. It was sort of almost the same weight that I had. Like, I don't want to cut this. I don't want to cut that. Yeah. But it had like a different maybe reason behind it. The stuff that I had written that I wanted to remove, that I decided to remove, I was like, but I worked so hard on this and it was really good.
Interesting. Okay,
I want this. It's like such a great way to put it or whatever. Mm-hmm. The words are great. It's working great. And versus the poems, it's like, a lot of it was like, no, like, it's such an important poem. I don't want to remove any of the impact from that poem because it's so important. I want to keep those Palestinian words in there. But then again, I was like, I need to use it in a way that serves the story the best.
I love that. Always reverting to what serves the story.
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. Okay, we're going to dive into humanity a little bit. I mean, when we exited humanity, honestly. But I love just talking about, like, it is hard to be an artist. It is hard to be a writer. It is hard to be a creative. So can we talk about how you as people addressed writer's block, imposter syndrome, failure, moments of doubt through the process? If you had them. If not, how did you not have them? Because I would love to know.
Teach me, please.
Yes, please. I'm all ears. John is nodding a lot. I don't know. It seems like John was reading.
Exactly. Or I blocked all those moments out. So,
that's a good way to put it,
right? For me, I like to go on like walks just to clear my mind if I'm ever like stuck.
Yeah.
Actually, I was on a hike near my home very early on in the process, and again, the show was just always in my mind. Like, again, like whenever an idea come up, I would open this Google Doc, which is probably like 100 pages now. But I remember I was on a hike and it was about 45 minutes. And at the very end, I was about to finish and like just my body kind of like stiffened up and like just kind of my posture changed. And I was like, oh, this is Mr. Breimer, like one of the teachers that I have in the show. And I was just like, he just came to me out of nowhere But I was, again, I'm thinking about it. It was, as long as it's like in the, I don't know, zeitgeist, my personal zeitgeist, I think that like something will kind of come to you, whether you're ready for it or not. So in those moments where I was like physically writing, if I got stuck, I would, again, get up, move my body, shake it around, go stretch, do some yoga. Again, like those free write sessions with Soaring Solo Studios was like very valuable, just to kind of, they would give us a prompt and it'd be like, okay, write for 10 minutes. And I would just like dump some words on the page. I think it's just important to be in the practice of writing, whether that's, I like to write pen to paper, but obviously I got to put all that on the computer at some point. But I think just both practices of like getting whatever's in this head like down, even if it's not making sense in the moment. It's like, I don't know how this is connecting or what relevance this has to the end product, but here, it's something. And so, yeah, again, the doubt still exists sometimes where I'm just like, I mean, by now I'm kind of like, I trust it, that, okay, we got something here. But I don't like saying you just got to power through, because that feels very like muscular and like that doesn't work for everybody, right? But I do think you need to kind of trust your inner why. It's like, why am I doing this in the first place? And that was very key for me, because at first I didn't even really think I had a clear sort of like reason why. But once I was able to kind of articulate that, don't ask me right now because I can't remember. But once I had like an internal why, I just let that kind of drive me, and I would go back to it to say, oh, okay, like this is what we're trying to accomplish.
I love that your show's mission statement. Like, I feel like that's, Oh, thanks, Joe. Finding, like, we do it with an organization, businesses do it, right? Like, knowing what your mission statement is, and always going back to that when you get lost in the weeds or when you're just not sure what to do. I love that. That's something I also did a lot, is just go back to my main goal. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this show? To remind me, to unlock those moments of block and so on. Another very important thing for me was trying to find the balance between letting the ideas flow, and letting what needs to be written and what needs to come out versus the need to control it and have a certain idea of like, this is what I want it to be, so I gotta do it. So really finding a nice balance between those two, where like I need to let go of that control, because it's blocking me in a lot of different ways. Whereas I remember when when I was trying to write my first draft, I was like so much, I was controlling it. I was like, I wanted to be this way and this and that. And I had this idea. I was just like kind of pushing it, and it was just not working. And it's only when I let go of that preconception of what the show should be that the ideas started really flowing in. It's just like they kind of come together. It's you let go of the control of that preconception, and then the show will sort of write itself through you. You just got to let that artistic flow go, and of course it's you will face those moments where you're like, you want to control and you want to do this, and you will find the blocks and so on, but it's also part of the process of like the show coming together, and us as artists finding the right balance to get to that point. I love that. We're going to switch gears a little bit because I really want to talk about teams, building your teams, who you brought in, because as a solo artist, that is a lot of weight to carry alone, a lot of hats to wear in a production where you were suddenly the writer, the performer, and then any other hats that you don't find people to wear during the process. So who did you have on your team to help you not have a lonely journey at Fringe?
Sure, I can go first. So originally I was all alone. I was like, I'm gonna do this. I'm a solo artist. I gotta
Yes.
do the whole thing by myself.
I got it.
I got this. So I'm the writer. I'm the producer. I'm also gonna maybe direct it. And it's like I'm
All
getting
of
to a
that.
point where I'm like, actually, the first time I started letting go of that idea is I was meeting with someone who had done the Fringe before, and I talked to him, and he was like, I implore you, don't do this by yourself. Do not do this by yourself. So I was like, okay. So I was like, okay. So I found some people who are interested in my show and in the topic I was talking about. I got first thing I got was someone helping me in producing. And then it took me a lot of time actually to find my directors because I was so keen on finding Palestinian director for a Palestinian show. So, and it was very difficult for me to find a Palestinian theater director in LA for that show. You know, I was asking a lot of people in the community. They know people in New York, they know film directors, but not theater directors. And it's actually a very funny story. I met my director, the person who ended up being one of my two directors at one of the office hours at Hollywood Fringe.
Weird. What we've been saying all along.
I was, I had one person on the team who was my Palestinian friend who's a film director. I wanted someone collaborating with him for the theater side of things. And I still wanted to find the Palestinian theater director. And I met Becca Khalil. She also did another Fringe show. So she was working on two shows, directing one and then performing in one.
Shout out Van Life.
Fantastic. Van Life. Amazing show. And so she's, one of the people, I met one of the people in her team. They were like, I told them I'm doing this show about Palestine. They were like, oh, you should meet Becca. And they bring over Becca and I'm talking to Becca and Becca's like, oh my God, like I will help you find the Palestinian theater director. And then a few minutes later, she comes back to me and she's like, if I don't, can I direct this? And I was like, sure. What have you directed before? So, and we ended up not really finding a Palestinian director in LA, and she ended up being the other side of the two directors. So I had at that point producer, two directors, and I brought on my stage managers as well. I needed someone to support me in the rehearsal process, and we had also a producers, directors, and a person who was mostly responsible for marketing and helping in that arena. Obviously, I was doing a little bit of everything, but now I had a team to support me and all of that. And of course, like there were a lot of issues that came up throughout the process, such as, it's normal, you'll find that some people don't work well with other people. And, you just gotta work with it, deal with the thing and move on. And
yeah, I think it's so important that you hit on like finding people that truly believe in your work.
yes.
That is going to be everything, because you have to have you and your team, the people who are out promoting your work, be so excited about it and be so passionate about it. Otherwise, it's not going to sell. Like an example, in Edinburgh, they do a lot of like hiring people who like live in Edinburgh to work on shows that are not invested in their work. And you can tell when I get flyed by someone who's in the show or a part of the show versus somebody who's been hired at an hourly rate to flyer the show. I can tell, and I don't go to that show. Where it's someone who's come, this show is for you. This is why it matters. Those are the people you want working on your team. 100% about that. John?
Yes. Again, I started out being like, I am doing this on my own. This is my baby. Yeah. We're going to bring it to life the way I want to do it. I did know that I needed an outside eye though. Yeah. And like, again, I had worked with Chanel in the past, and I was just like, okay, when I asked her to be my director, I was like, great. And at first I thought it would just be the two of us. And for the most part it was, but every now and then I would bring in other people. I brought in like again, other just friends from grad school to do like associate directing, just to have a third eye on it. I met with like a story consultant once I had sort of like a finalized draft, just to kind of talk about the ideas, and they actually really helped me develop my pitch. Like literally like a few hours before like my first office hours, and I was just like, oh, like you do need like a quick 15-second pitch that you can just like talk about the show to everyone, so they can just kind of like, oh, that's what it is.
And it's smart to have an outside voice help you discover that, because you know the show so intimately.
Right.
What is going to be that like elevator pitch that catches someone else's interest and attention?
100% that. And we, fortunately, my director, she was like, she opened up her home so we could have like a dress rehearsal. So we invited like some really trusted friends a few days before the first performance, just like maybe 8 people, just to kind of come watch it. And again, they were very important, I guess, to the process, just to have an audience before I got up in front of like the public. But honestly, at the end of the day, I still feel like I wore 28,000 hats. I was props, wardrobe, lights. I did all the sound design, like, I had no idea what sound. I had nothing. No knowledge of sound design. And I asked my partner, because they take music classes and they're like starting to DJ. I was like, oh, can you do the music? And they were like, is it like this or like that? I was like, no, you don't get it. YouTube, tell me how to use Audacity. And I was just like,
troll theme and so
yes. Oh yeah. I was like, it's gotta sound a certain way. And people were like really like the music in the show. And I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, I was like walking down Santee Alley and just like, okay, I want those earrings and I need that like outfit. And it was like, you're playing all the roles, because you know what it is like, right? You know what you want it to be. And so don't say no to anything. Just kind of like be open to learning. YouTube is a free university. They have so many wonderful offerings.
So true.
Even like the Fringe resources on YouTube.
Good call
like,
out at
come
Hollywood
on.
Fringe.
If you want to learn anything, you can do it. It's out there. But yes, have someone you trust to just be an outside eye at some point in your process, to just help you, again, bounce ideas off of, so you're not in like tunnel mode.
Yeah. And I think like, because everyone's going to have a different version of like scale when it comes to Fringe. There's going to be people, because is it ideal to have a marketing person, a stage manager, a like PR team? Sure. Absolutely. That's ideal. Can everyone afford that? No. And so it's absolutely okay. And we see it still work successfully if you have a buddy just to lean into. You know, maybe you help each other 15 minutes. Oh, 10 minutes. Okay. We might end a couple minutes later. But having just a buddy to come to office hours with, or to, you know, lean on when it's like, oh my God, what does this social look like to you? Is this getting my point across? So you can find a way to build your network without it necessarily being a paid network. You know, maybe John's really good at marketing. I'm really good at PR. We have shows. Hey, I'll do some marketing for you. You do some PR for me. These kind of switches. So use our community as well, because you're going to all have different skills. Okay, we're going to move to questions, because we only have 10 minutes left, according to Ellen. Which, thank God for that time zone. Our time check.
You've been talking for a while.
So I want to get everyone in the habit of introduce yourself if you have a question with your name, and if you know the show you're bringing to Hollywood Fringe, say it. If you don't, no worries. We can do that in the next one. But start marketing early, and now is early. So who has a question? Perfect. I'm going to bring you the mic.
Hi, everyone and everyone. My name's Jess. My show is called Eat the Mama, and I self-produced it in San Francisco last year, and that was its own journey. My question is, what advice do you have about paying people who are on your team? Because paying people is important to me, and also money.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I know.
Do you want me to start this one?
Please.
You can start this one.
Right. I mean, paying actors is always ideal, right? Paying the team is always ideal. I will note, just speaking to what Fringe is often, because there's a different journey for everyone. it is low budget for most people. It is volunteer based for most people. It is maybe a stipend. Here's a meal. Here's gas money, sort of vibe. That's not always the case though. There's always the producers. If you can afford to pay your team, my goodness, pay your team, right? That's amazing. But no, a lot of people are not used to that journey at Fringe.
100%. Yeah. For me, it was, I would say it was a little bit of a different journey because I was doing a nonprofit show and I'm donating all the money. So, that would bring people in as well. Like, okay, we're donating our time and our money for this cause, for this project. But, at the same time, I realized as we kept going with the project and people were putting on so much more work and people are getting burnt out, it's also important to get paid, and starting with myself, like I paid from my own money and I got to a point where I'm like super burnt out and I'm like, okay, going forward, if I want to continue doing this show, I need to figure out ways to also pay myself because I'm missing work. I'm not doing enough work. I'm not making enough money from my daily job. So it's, finding that right balance of the people who are really interested in your work and wanting to help you and believing in you in this project. But also, and they are willing to volunteer their work, but also how can I compensate them for their work at the same time? And it's, I guess, a lot of times it would be, get the gas money or things like that. And if the show grows and you're able to get a grant, and that's amazing,
That's something too, right? Giving that like investment in your team.
Yes.
Maybe like I'm not in a place artistically, professionally where I can pay now, but you're my, I'm going to make sure I got you if there is money, if there's an extended run. And cause just you're going to want to work with people again. If you're a joy to work with, if you're doing the very best you can, if you're showing up with snacks to, to rehearsal, if you're doing what you can to support your team, it goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
I was like, I ain't got no money, so I will give you a stipend when I can, but like, please, like, this is all we got. Y'all ready to work? And people were just very generous.
Yeah.
But yeah, I everyone on my team, I was like, I want you to continue to grow with me as the show grows. So like, when we do hit it, we'll hit it together.
Exactly.
Right. Full disclosure is something too, right? Just like, don't like tell any upfront lies. Be like, hey, starting out with, I cannot afford to pay a team. You can say no.
That's why my team was small.
Yeah. Next question. Yes. We're going to try to speed this last 5 minutes.
Talk really quickly. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Harriet. Lovely to be here. My show is called Unladylike. I've already put it on, but it was 15 minutes long, but I wanted to extend it. And hearing you guys say that you can do 35 minutes to an hour, what's your personal thing that you do to nourish your health and your physical health and your vocal health as well to keep you safe?
That's a very important question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Very important question.
I do my vocal warm-ups, try to do it every day, but definitely before a show. YouTube, look up vocal warm-ups for actors.
This interview is sponsored by YouTube.
Epsom salt baths. I stretch as much as I can. I try to just stay limber. Lots of water. I drink a lot of water. I just try to keep myself in sort of like a space of like performance space. You got to stay ready. Meditation, journaling, all that good stuff.
Yeah. For me, with my show this time around, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't the best at taking care of myself. I was just, workaholic vibe. And it's like, I'm not taking care of myself. And the consequences hit at some point when I was like super burnt out. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I'm like, okay, hold on. I need to look at this and deal with this in a different way where I'm like, I'm finding that balance again. Like to me, balance is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. The balance of, okay, I put in the work, but I also take care of myself because taking care of myself will make me do better work at the end of the day. And I think that would include, whatever helps you, exercising, eating healthy, talking to people, doing stuff that you personally enjoy, just making sure you give yourself that time to do that. Yeah.
like saying I'd love to, but I can't. That is something I think people learn halfway through Fringe, where it's like I can't say yes to every show because I don't have enough hours in the day.
100%.
Yes, I saw another question on the side. Yes.
Hi, my name is Bernice. So my show, I'm just starting to work on it. I have the first work in progress this Sunday. So the working title is 干嘛的夜. And so my question, can you tell us a little bit more of the diversity scholarship? I'm sure there's website information I can look up. So kind of want to know what are the things that you want to tell us that it's not on the website. So like later when I look, I said, oh, okay, I remember that some useful tips, information, like what you learned from it.
Yeah, just a quick add-in. There's a little bit of information on the site, hollywoodfringe.org/scholarships. The application is not there yet because it doesn't open until November 25th.
I think that like in terms of that scholarship itself, I found everything I needed on the website. There wasn't like specifically anything that was missing. Maybe like the only thing I could think of would be that some people later on, would call it the diversity scholarship, whereas the name of the scholarship itself was not specifically diversity scholarship. It was BIPOC.
The Hollywood Fringe scholarships.
Hollywood Fringe. See, yeah. So I wasn't like, then I was like, oh, okay, that's what it is, and that's what people know it as well. That's the only thing I can think of, honestly.
Yeah. I'll add really quick because I know like both of you already touched on it, and I think it's an important note, is it doesn't have to be a finished work to apply for the scholarship. Yeah. The committee, like the staff doesn't decide. I am in the meeting, but I never, weigh in. The committee is made up of past winners and just like industry members in Los Angeles, but they look entirely based on the idea and like whether or not that idea they can visualize being on stage and impacting the festival. So you don't have to have like either one of you really had anything other than like, this is going to be a thing.
It's an idea.
Yeah. And both made it through the committee, so you don't have to have a full script to apply for the scholarship. Okay. Okay, perfect. These will be the last two.
Hi, I'm Harry Gillette. My show is going to be called Harry Gillette Party Astronaut. Party Astronaut. I was curious, we were talking about theatricality, and part of the breakdown on the website talked about small stages. I was curious if you had any ideas in your show that were really like physically big that you had to sort of scale down and how you did so.
That's the next workshop, next teaser. I love that.
I mean, I scaled my show to the space. I was in the Stephanie Fury, which is like a 36-seater. But I definitely there's an aisle in the theater in the middle. So I used the aisle twice in the show. There are doors where I was just opening. I was being as dynamic as I could within the space. When I went to San Francisco, it was a 99-seat theater, but I didn't really change anything in terms of the size. I just kind of used what was around, and I feel like I'll continue to do so as I do the show in different spaces.
Which is a great note if you are looking at having a touring show, starting to think about that now. How can you work in multiple spaces with multiple different tech elements and varieties? Yeah.
I'm going to say that I want to say the same thing. So we're short on time. So I was going to say the same thing, just different words. So we can move on to the next question. Yeah.
I know you talked about gestures and voices, and I heard you briefly describe accessories, but how did you guys visually handle character switches?
Oh, the both of these are so good.
That's
For me, I just popped into one and then into another. They all held themselves differently. And it was very clear, when I remember there was a specific rehearsal, we kind of did it as a warm up, but my director was I would walk around the room and she would name a character and she would be just jump right into that character.
Oh, I love that.
I would move as that character. And then she's okay, now this one. And then I would move as that character. But eventually every single character had a specific, I don't know, maybe they live in my right shoulder or they live in my left knee. So I could just draw my energetic focus there. But for me, it was very much pop. I had a scene where 4 characters were talking at once. And that was a scene where I had to chop and just make it one character primarily talking to the other 3. But it was very sharp, sudden shifts.
I'm so sorry, Ronnie. It's my fault. I can't keep to a time.
I also found a similar way of doing that. Also, finding the character in my body and really finding the energy of that character and how they carry themselves in the world. I also do a lot of those sorts of exercises where I'm like walking around in the room and my character is like, giving me prompts to find the character in my body. And it got to a point where it's like super easy to switch from character to character. And it's very clear to the audience as well. I don't need to do anything additional to show that. Yeah.
Audiences are smart.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Myriam, John. You are fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to everyone outside waiting. So if you are interested in immersive theater 101, upstairs, big ideas, small stages, downstairs.